All right, I think we're going to go get started. Welcome everyone to another installment of the Columbia Water Center's State of America's Water, Present and Future webinar series, sponsored by CUAHSI. Along with Professor Lal, I am Adam Schempp, Director of the Western Water at the Environmental Law Institute, and we would like to thank you for joining us. Today we'll be hearing from Sara Larsen, the Water Data Exchange, commonly referred to as WaDE, Program Manager for the Western States Council. She will be explaining the form and function of WaDE, which is a new framework for state water agencies to share important water data related to planning, water and water availability with each other and with the public. A little bit of background on Sara. Before joining the Western States Water Council, she worked at Los Alamos National Laboratory in the Energy and Infrastructure Analysis Group, and she also has worked for the state of Utah's Division of Resources in their GIS. She has a bachelor's degree in Geography GIS and a master's degree in Civil Engineering and Water Resources from the University of Utah. And with that, I will hand over control to Sara.
Thank you, Adam. Let me get this started. Okay. As Adam mentioned, my name is Sara Larsen, and I work for the Western States Water Council. I'm very, very excited to be here and to talk to you about the Water Data Exchange project. First, I just want to thank CUAHSI and Columbia for having me for this webinar. It's a great privilege to be here to tell you about this. And before we get just a couple of logistics, if you can't hear me very well, do please type into the chat window and let me know, and I will try and speak louder, but I don't want you out either. Can everybody hear me okay? Please write down in your chat window if you can. Great. Sounds like it's coming through, or looks like it's coming through just fine. Great. The other logistical issue is that a construction crew decided to get started on a project outside my window earlier today. And so if you hear some sawing or banging, then that's them, and everything's just fine. Just a little bit of construction outside my window, and I apologize for that. Okay, let's get started. What I'd like to do is start out today's webinar by just giving you an overview of what I'd like to talk about. I'd like to go over the background for the Water Data Exchange project, and I'd like to tell you a little bit about how it works, how we set it up to transfer and share data, what kinds of data it is set to provide currently, and also where we hope to be in about 5 years and what we think the future will look like for this data sharing initiative. And what would help you, probably a question you all have, is what is the Western States Water Council? What would help you understand how this data exchange got started would be to understand more about the council. The council is a collaborative body that was begun in 1965 by Western governors, and what they wanted to do was have a forum where people could discuss water issues and challenges that they were facing and collaborate to try and have a more unified voice in Western states about these water issues that they were facing. And so since that time, it's been about 50 years. We celebrated our 50th birthday just this summer. Since that time, the council members have been meeting every year to talk about these issues and to also create that unified voice on issues like by crafting policy statements or putting out positions. The Western states are currently from Texas to North Dakota and westward, including Alaska. We used to have Hawaii as a member, but it's kind of a bummer. They decided that they didn't want to get up at 3 o'clock in the morning to attend our meetings. So they haven't been a member for a while, but I'm secretly hoping that we'll be able to talk them back into it. So that's the council. And what I'd like to tell you about is a different that actually got started back about the same time that the Water Data Exchange got started. Western Governors Association and the DOE were very, very interested in the intersection between energy security, water planning, and transmission planning. They wanted to try and figure out how they might be able to get water as a constraint into the modeling that places like WEC, the Western Electric Coordinating Council, and ERCOT, this is an energy transmission planning group in Texas, get water into their models so that they would be able to include that in the plan. And so the DOE and Sandia National Laboratory came to Western Governors Association and said, well, we need some help. And WGA came and tapped us on the head, the Western States Water Council, and said, well, what can you do to help Sandia and WEC and ERCOT get in touch with the state water agency leads and try and help get water into their models? There were a lot of different agencies and labs that got involved in this project. There are many other partners that included Argonne National Laboratory, the Electric Power Research Institute, or EPRI, included NREL, INL, and Pacific Northwest Laboratory. And what we did was we connected Sandia and all of these other labs with the state agency leads to try and work on some metrics on water availability and also demand, both in the year 2012 and also through 2030. And it took about a year and a half to collect all of this data for all of the Western states. And Sandia put together these really neat maps that show on a more regional scale what they thought would be water available both now and in the future and in 2030. So this is an example of the maps that they came out with. One is just for appropriated water availability, the other is for groundwater availability. And this is a sample of the metrics that they used. This one is for groundwater. And really the study, it's available on Sandia's website, but one thing that the study really highlighted was the lack of available state data. It was really difficult for the Sandia research team to reach out to the state agencies and in a comprehensive way be able to put that information together into a more comparable West-wide picture of water availability. Well, when we realized that this was an issue, we thought about it and decided, well, let's work with WGA and the DOE to put together a framework where we can share more information and try and help make studies like Sandia National Lab more repeatable and be able to redo them in the future. Looks like we might be having some audio problems. Let me check my phone. Okay, can everybody still hear me? It's a bit staticky. Oh dear. Okay. All right. I'll slow down a little bit so that maybe the staticiness will go away. I'm hoping. Okay. Right about the same time, well, a little earlier, this is back in 2009, the Western Governors Association and Western States Water Council came out with a pretty pivotal report called the Water Needs Strategies for Sustainable Future Next Steps Report. And this is a really wonderful report if you ever get a chance to read it. It has a lot of ideas about how different sectors and agencies can collaborate on water issues, and especially how we might arrive at a more regional analysis of water issues in the West. And one of the things that it put forward in writing was to add data sharing as part of the Western States Water Council's work plan to try and foster this idea of sharing important information between the states and also with the public. It was just a work plan item for a long time until that Sandia National Lab study came along, and the Western States Water Council actually ended up being able to have some funding to get started on this issue. And that's where I came into the picture. I came in on board on the council in 2012 just to work on this water data exchange project. So we have two major pushes for sharing. We have the Water Needs Strategies Report and Western Governors Association and the council being interested in sharing data. And then we also have a major consumer of data, this energy consortium, that really need and really would like to have access to data. And these two things combined really push this project forward. It's important to understand what kinds of data we're talking about. What kinds of data do state agencies usually curate? What are we targeting? Well, a lot of the states have their own stream gauging data that they work on with UES that they would like to share. It's not yet part of NWIS, but it's important to them, important to the states. A lot of the states work on basin budgets or water supply summaries. They are working on water availability, whether or not water is available for allocation within a particular watershed or basin. They're tracking water diversion, and in some cases, some consumptive uses. And of course, the common element between all of the Western states is their water rights and permitting programs. One of the main authorities of state water agencies is to issue these water rights and permits, and then some of them have reporting requirements to come back with them. So a lot of the state water, one caveat is that the state water agencies have all lake programs. So they're all a little bit different. These are the most common kinds of data sets, but they're all a little bit different. So just keep that in mind. One thing we think is really neat about state water agency data is that a lot of the state agency staff keep in touch with the local water districts and the users of the water, because they're allocating the water and they're also getting those reporting figures. They have local knowledge about their water situation. And that's important to remember when you're talking about generating information. That local knowledge can be extremely valuable. So I've got a picture here of a water master. And just as an example, Texas, actually the Texas Council of Environmental Quality, one of the water agencies in Texas, actually works directly with their water masters to make sure that water is being distributed properly. So this is the kind of local handling of water issues that we think is really valuable, a valuable part of state water agency data. One thing to know is that a lot of states actually do publish a lot of their information. An example is Texas Water Development Board. They've been on the very forefront of putting a lot of their data out there. And a lot of the states have open data policies that they're trying to follow. They're trying to get more of their information out there. The only difficulty is that oftentimes it's really hard to find that information. It's really difficult to try and assemble a more regional picture out of that information, because the vocabulary differs so much from state, and so this is a difficult thing to overcome. Well, when the council decided that they wanted to get started on this project, they said, well, what do we want to call it? Let's get really, really creative, and we'll just call it the Water Data Exchange. And so we're calling it the Water Data Exchange, or for short. And our big picture goals are simply to better enable the states to share important water data with each other, the public, and with federal agencies. And then our second goal is to try and encourage our federal partners to begin to share more of their data with the states. And we think this would really help water agencies, because right now, if they want to do any modeling, they typically have to go to about at least 3 or 4 different sources of information. And then they have to prepare that data for the models beforehand, before they're actually able to use it. And that can be getting the data ready for a model, if you've ever done that work, can be as intensive as running the model themselves, and then trying to interpret the results. So we think it would really help if we could get more of our federal partners on board with this idea of sharing data in standardized formats. Our smaller picture goals are simply to get a handle on the variability in the state. We spent a lot of 2012 surveying different member states and trying to figure out which states were doing what kinds of things with water availability, with basin budgets, what their methods were, what kind of geospatial scales they were working on, and what kind of time scales they were working on. Understanding that really highlighted the challenge for arriving at a more comparable picture of water availability in the West. Some people use tiny basins to evaluate water availability in West, and some states had only 7 or 8 basins, planning basins that they were using. So they were all a little bit different. And the same was with the timescales that they would use. Some people were able to gather diversion data on a monthly basis. Other people only had annual estimates. And then people also worked on different time frames. So we're talking about calendar years, water years. We have one state that uses an irrigation year. So it just depends on the legacy program within the state, what kinds of information they have. We started out with just some really basic targeted schema for a lot of these. Just looking at these most common data elements that most of the state agencies were developing. And we took it around during our outreach visits to the states and said, here's the schema that we've developed, what do you think? And they took a look at it and said, nope, that's not going to work for us. And so we talked to them for a long time and then came back to our headquarters and reworked the schema. And we took it to our next state and said, what do you think of this? And worked through the same process with them. And what we ended up with was a common data schema for these most commonly generated data products from the states. It doesn't capture everything that the states do, but it does capture, I would say, something like 75% of what most of the states are producing. We call that our WaDE data schema, and we're at version 0.2 right now. And we are going to continue to work on that data schema into the future. At some point, we have to firm it up so that our can actually use it and start publishing data in it. And then after a couple more years, we include some additional changes and the include recommendations and things like that. So we have a lot of governance that makes this always work in progress. Our third goal is simply to show how our data exchange will work. First year, we spent a little bit of time putting together a prototype that would work and tested that, and we've gone a long way since that time. We want to encourage other partners to start sharing data by adopting standardized data systems. So in states, if they have stream gauging data, and we already have an international standard for that information, like WaterML 2.0 or something else, groundwater ML or sensor ML or whatever format that is, fits that data best, then we're going to say to the state, please use this. The WaDE data, because it's tailored more toward water rights and water uses and things like that, it's a pretty specific data schema that we're recommending the states use for that kind of information. But if there's another schema that works well for the states, like that's more widely accepted, then we're saying please use that and share your data using that. Okay. All right, so we have a lot of work groups. We do a of outreach. Here are our 4 work groups. We have a state capabilities assessment work group. This is a group that worked on that foundational work at the beginning. They actually came out with a report last year that has each one of the states' different programs described in great detail. The methods work group is looking at all the different methods that are going into the state's product, and they ended up kind of joining the state capabilities assessment work group just because they're so similar. That report in the appendix has a description of a lot of the different methods that are going into state water use programs and like legal availability estimates, things like that. We have a data exchange template work group and a data exchange methods work group. These are 2 work groups that go into schema development and another one that goes into more of the technical development of WaDE. A lot of the work has already been a lot of issues have been identified and a lot of the work has been finalized, so these groups are a little bit dormant at this time. We've done a lot of outreach with our member states because, of course, they published the supportive idea of data sharing in a report. It doesn't mean that when you actually come to them with a database and say, hey, would you please your database and publish that to the world, that they're going to be excited about it. So actually, a lot of our member states and worked them through their issues one-on-one and to make this the kind of project that they would be really set up. And then, like I said earlier, we built databases with schema and prototype mapping interface go along with it. I'm going to take a break before we get into more of the framework development. Look at our chat box, and if anybody has any questions, could you please type them into the chat box and take a little break, and I'll answer your questions so far. I'm getting a couple questions. What will get the states to use this schema? Well, good question. Because we went and visited with all of the states, we worked through the schema with them all and tried to make sure that it would accommodate most of what they were doing. And within each state, when we worked through the process with them, they were able to eventually say, okay, this will work. So a lot of people talk about having a community vocabulary. This is actually probably one of the more interesting community vocabulary situations where we've gone to each of the state agencies and said, let's standardize some of the terms that we're talking about and actually put them into tables. And they're not perfectly aligned all the time, and there are a lot of caveats and warnings on WaDE about that, but they're getting to be more and more similar. And what you'll see in the future is that we can have, once we know what we currently have, that's when we get to have a more interesting conversation about, well, where do we want to be in 2020 or 2025? Do we want to try and figure out a best management practice for this particular data set and incorporate those into our workflows so that all of the states can report some kind of water use at a Huckgate scale, like Sandia was trying to do? That's a really interesting prospect, but that's off in the future ways. Are there any other questions? Box? Okay. All right. So how does this work? What we've got is, well, our approach is to simply not have databases transferred back and forth. You don't want to have the states trying to push different things, give us the databases and have us manage them. We want them to have local ownership of that information and be interested in maintaining it. So what we do is we give them our WaDE database, and they will map their data into our database and keep it internal, and data available through web services and through a catalog. Then what we do is we pull the catalog information into the WaDE central portal. And if you go to the central portal, then all you have to do is click on a basin and you'll get the catalog of information that's within that basin. And that will give you access back to the state data that's hosted at the state and retrieve the latest and greatest information that they have for whatever it is that they're sharing. There's one big bonus to this, and that is that one of the concerns for the states is being to control what they share at different points in time. And so when we would visit the state, we would say, look, this is one of the really good things, is that you will be able to turn this on, turn different segments on and off if you wish. You will be able to modify things as you need to without having to go back to some other database or another copy and making changes there. You'll have local control of everything you share. What we want to do is make that available using a REST web service endpoint so that everybody who has these web services stood up, if you put in numbers, you'll be able to pull in the same types of information. So all you would have to do would be to change the location information in that URL query, and it would go and retrieve that information through your web browser and bring it back to you, the user. Of course, one of the really nice things about web services is that you can adjust them without really even needing to go to the website. If you know the URL, then you can pull information directly into, say, a model or a spreadsheet, and it will be the latest and greatest updated information. As more states start sharing information, then we start to get at a more regional picture, and we also start to see the variability between the states, and we can start having those conversations I talked about changing some of the things within state AG workflows to try and accommodate a West-wide metric, perhaps, on, say, water use or water availability. That's going to be, it's going to be interesting to have those conversations because what the states do is so variable. In the future, we'd also like to be able to pull in some of the web services shared by other agencies. It would be really great to be able to access, say, USDA information or snow information from NRCS, or those water use metrics from Sandia, or more stream gauging data from USGS. It kind of depends on how many people start adopting these standardized formats and how many others are sharing their data using open data concepts. And I'll talk a little bit more about that toward the end. What kind of data are we talking about specifically? Well, we've broken down our state agency data into two different types. The first is a summary, where the state is performing some kind of aggregation into a watershed or basin, whatever it is that they're using for their primary planning unit. And what we allow them to share are water availability summaries, if they have that information, if they're generating how much water remains to be allocated and from what kinds of sources. We allow the states to share water use summaries. So the kinds of things that you would see in the USGS water use report, you might be able to access directly from the states, their information about water use, which is the basis for a lot of the USGS data. And also see that broken down by beneficial use category. The state is generating a water supply summary or a water budget for a basin. You'd be able to see that. And you'd also be able to check out any regulatory information, like if an area is closed to further groundwater development, you would be able to see that, or there were extra, anything that requires any additional oversight, like a minimum in-stream flow requirement or ESA issues, those kinds of things you'd be able to access as well. The second kind of information that we have is more site-specific. We call it detailed data. And this includes a lot larger tables on water rights, and we would want to include things like the owner and the beneficial use category, the legal status for that information, and priority dates. We'd also want to include things like diversion records, any measuring that's going on within a basin. If the state is estimating any consumptive use, we would want to look into that and be able to share that information, as well as return flows. So one of the things that would be really wonderful in the future is if more states were developing this kind of data, eventually you'd be able to close that water budget within the watershed using this more site-specific information. You would be able to track water from diversion, not necessarily looking at conveyance, but be able to track it from a diversion point, see different places of use associated at diversion point, and then also see return flows associated with the use and the diversion. So really, it can get really detailed. We can host some pretty detailed information. All of this gets returned to the user using XML. The format for data doesn't look pretty, and it's a little bit tricky to read, but this is what it looks like when it gets pulled into your computer. We try and make the portal a little bit easier to read by putting some nicer looking interface elements over the top of the XML, like tables and pie charts and things like that, so that it looks a lot nicer. And of course, the real bonus here is that you'd be able to pull this XML directly into your models, into your computer on an as-needed basis. What we'd like to do, at least right now, phase one, is to get the states plugged in. Right now, I have a lot of states who are, a few states who are flowing data, several more who are working on this, several more who are awaiting funding, and then a couple more who are probably just hanging back to see what happens with this. So that's phase one. Phase two is to pull in any of those federal or hydrologic measurement data that, if we can, such as stream gauging data, any reservoir heights, no-till, forecasts, those kind of things. That would be in phase two. All right, I'm going to take a wee break and answer any questions from the chat box. So if you have a question so far, please ask away. Okay, first question is there potential for the private sector to adopt or use the schema? Yes, you certainly may. Right now, our WaDE portal is specific to our member states, and those are the ones that we're targeting, at least in phase one. But we've talked a lot about allowing other authoritative sources of data, like the tribes, and other consortiums to use the WaDE database to host this kind of information. So if you review the WaDE schema and you think that this is a really good fit for the kinds of data that you want to share, then you're more than welcome to take the database and start sharing data. It's a very lean set of components, and we have developed them using open source methods, so you don't even need to pay any money in order to use it. And all you'd have to do is just send me an email after this, and I would pass those along to you. The second question is, what is the advantage of this to small municipal or private water providers? That's a really good question. I think if you were a small municipal or private water provider, you would be interested in what the state has to say about your particular basin. One, you'd want to check and make sure that they're sharing the right information. But two, you'd also want to know what else is going on in your basin. And we think that this will be of particular use to the academic sector and to politicians and journalists and the public, anybody who is interested in what the state water agency has to say about different water supply sources and different uses within that particular basin. Are there other regional collaborative efforts like this that you are emulating, or is this surely innovative? We are not new. This has been done before, and I'm very, very happy to let you know, to give props to the folks over at EPA and the Exchange Network for developing something that's very similar to this a lot earlier than WaDE came about. It's called the Water Quality Exchange, and it's basically it's the same framework that's distributed, where states end up sending the same kinds of information to EPA for water quality data. And interestingly, that was put together by a bunch of folks in EPA, and one of them was a fellow named Dwayne Young. That gentleman ended up being an officer at our council for a couple of years. And when he saw that data sharing was on the work plan, and he had had experience with the Water Quality Exchange, he was the one who said, you know what, we can do this again, but we can do it for the state agency data. And wouldn't that be a revolutionary thing? I mean, this is really a truly paradigm-changing approach, in that state data has typically been held very close. So in that way, it is very innovative, but the framework is not. It's loosely based on the EPA's and Exchange Network's Water Quality Exchange. I hope that answers your questions. If not, then let's get to the end, and we can try and clarify. Oh, good. Okay, so where are we now? It's 2015. It's been 3 years. We've put together all of this stuff. It's good to know what is available. Well, we came out with our WaDE version 0.2 schema. That's established for the time being. I don't think that's going to change for the next year or two. We just need to settle on a version until the states are plugged into the portal and use that for a while, kind of kick the tires on it for a while, and gather all of the suggested changes before we move to version 0.3. We've developed databases based on version 0.2 in Microsoft SQL and Postgres. We also had plans to do it in Oracle, but we just haven't had the time to do the same thing for Oracle yet. We have web services code that's based on version 0.2 for accessing that data. And one of the things that we heard from our states was simply that because a lot of the states have central IT departments where a lot of their IT work is not done in-house, they have a lot of difficulty setting up these kinds of web applications. And to try and ameliorate that, we propose a cloud deployment option where states will be able to push their information into a cloud. So it's kind of cheating in that they don't have that data in their local environment, but it's almost identical. They operate that remote instance of WaDE very much like it was within their own IT department, but it did solve some of the concerns that the IT folks had. And it also solves some of the problems of network capacity. If you're a state like Idaho or Montana, you might not have access to Google Fiber like you might in California or some of the larger, more populated states. And they were really worried about consuming resources on their limited bandwidth. So the cloud solves a couple of different problems, and we were really happy to give them that option. Let's see. The other things that we've worked on are some online documentation to guide the states with deployment, and working through the data mapping with each of the individual states and agencies. So now that these components are built, I've just become more of a help desk kind of person, where all the states who are currently putting their data into the WaDE platform give me a call whenever they encounter an issue or have a question, and I just help them work through it. That's pretty exciting. Where are we now? The other thing that we're working on right now is some resource issues. When we first came out to the States, it was pretty soon. It was only 3 years after the recession really hit. And as you, well, you maybe wouldn't know, but the state budgets end up typically lagging through the recession and recovery. So 2012, the states were still really struggling and said, you know what, we've lost staff and we have enough resources for really mission critical tasks, but not for something like this. And so one of the things that we wanted to do was try and secure some funding for any states who needed any assistance getting the WaDE application deployed. So we've applied to a couple of different agencies for additional funding, both for state partners and for Western States Water Council to continue to coordinate the program. Our initial funding was from Western Governors Association and the DOE, but that was not going to last forever. We also got some smaller grants from WGA to assist with data development or other WaDE-related tasks. The really great thing is our first grant was accepted. That was for Idaho, Washington, Oregon, Texas, and Oklahoma. And they're currently working through the deployment process and should be online soon. Utah, Colorado, and Wyoming got a little bit of assistance from WGA, and they are currently flowing data, although it's not public yet because we want to wait until we have just a few more states. And some other states are deploying without any assistance at all. Nebraska and Kansas are included in that. And then we have one more grant application that is pending. We got a tentative approval for that grant, but it's still under review in the Office of Environments within the EPA, and that one's for California, Nevada, and South Dakota. So we have 17 member states at this current time, and the majority of them are either working on this or very active on the program. I'm very excited about that because it's taken a number of years to actually meet with people enough times to get some real momentum going from the states. It's been an exciting prospect. And what I wanted to convey to you is why this project is so important and why it's so needed and what kind of gap it really tries to fill. The states get asked for information all the time. They're always pushed to try and access more information, whether it's the USGS water census, whether it's the IRIS program or water and energy nexus studies or EPA. There are so many different requests for data, and that's from federal families. And then there are also academic research requests from journalists and politicians and utility planners. These are the kind of things that would really help a whole swath of people if they could have access to that information in an easier to find and more uniform way, and even a centralized way through the central portal. And what the states realized is that because these kind of questions are not going away, because there's population growth, and because there's some major drought issues, and yes, even climate change, and energy and food and water nexus security issues, these kind of questions are not going to go away. And what WaDE does is it allows studies like Sandia's and all of these other related efforts to be done on a repeating basis. And it makes it so that it's more discoverable, it's more uniform than it was before, and it's repeatable. You'd be able to repeat studies from year to year and actually be able to see trends in state water data from year to year. And I think a lot of the states realized that because these kind of questions were coming down the pike, what they wanted to do was be more proactive about that so that they would be positioning themselves to be able to answer these kind of questions strategically. So that when Water Census or EPA or these other groups come down the line and say, okay, well, we really need access to your data, then they say, okay, we've got it, here it is, and it's in a format that we like and that we have agreed to share our data in, and we're ready for you. So this is really about looking down the road and seeing the future and being able to address those questions ahead of time. Maybe it's like 10 years late, actually, but at least they're thinking about it now. Okay. One of the big questions that I get whenever I talk to anybody about WaDE is, how does this fit in with other data sharing efforts? Because there are a number of other initiatives that are coming down the pike too. And so what I like to do is talk about different kinds of data and how they are stacked as a pyramid to each other. At the very base of the pyramid are the sensors and the measurement data that we all base everything else on. Stream gauge data, groundwater elevation. And these are really fundamental sets of data. And what this usually do is they'll take that information and then put it into some kind of model, some kind of hydrologic model or groundwater model to arrive at either a water availability estimate or a basin budget, that kind of thing. Whatever the methodology is that they used gets incorporated into the WaDE portal. So WaDE actually becomes just a simple data aggregation platform. It's not a policy tool. It's trying to just simply share the information that the states currently have and pointing a way forward in the future. So WaDE just puts that data together in one place. Sandia and other groups and other consortiums can take that information and they can build more tools that are can work with that information, can change it so that it's more seamless, like Sandia's water and energy availability models. So the idea is to have really good data on the bottom pyramid, and then research and analysis, building policy tools on that, and then building good policy based on those tools. And that's kind of how we see a lot of this information playing out, at least for the states. When we talk about other data sharing initiatives, like, for example, the Open Water Data Initiative within the federal family, we simply want to allow access to WaDE information and be a part of that framework. So make sure that we're participating in developing standards for more heterogeneous partners, because we're not part of a big agency that has been putting out very, very reliable data for long periods of time. So our partners are a little more heterogeneous and have their own in-house methods. We just want to make sure that we're working with those larger water data initiatives, the larger data sharing initiatives, so that we can participate in those. CUAHSI's hydro share is a really important part of that. I think it would be really great to take information that's shared in WaDE and integrate that within HydroShare the way that they shared it. So get in touch with me, and we'll talk to you folks after this webinar, I'm sure. Now that we actually have more states actually flowing data, it would be good to look at that, see how we might integrate more CUAHSI. Okay, so we have a lot of different agencies hopefully looking into water data exchange for more information. We have our federal agency consumers, academic folks, journalists, politicians, utility planners, hopefully using the water data exchange for more information. And what we'd like to see in the future is simply that conversation about how to get, what kind of things we might incorporate into state water plans so that we can get a more west-wide and regional picture. Let's see. Oh, and that's the end. Okay. If you'd like to find out more information about the work groups and our scheduling and when the central portal gets released, please go to westernstateswater.org, and you can click on the WaDE tab. Or you can email me at Sara Larsen at Western States Water Council, wswc.utah.gov, and I'd be happy to answer your questions. And it looks like there's a couple of questions here on the chat board, so this is great. Let's see here. Where did we end? Okay, is there any interest in expanding this beyond the Western states? That is a great question. We have built the schema as well as we could with interviewing Western states such that it could be utilized by Eastern states. So if you notice, we use the term water allocation a lot. That is because it's a little bit more general term than water rights and water permits. And as you know, in the West, we use an appropriative water law to allocate water within the state. And in the East, we have riparian. So we tried to build it so that it was general enough that we could actually use it for Eastern states if they wanted to. We've talked to a couple of the larger data gathering groups, like Great Lakes, and see a little bit of potential there, but they already have a few systems in place that make it hard for them to transition over. So far, I think that we'll just keep working on sharing our Western data, and then as time goes by and as we make changes to the WaDE data schema, we might be able to accommodate Eastern states a little bit better. Okay, is there a national water data exchange on the horizon? Oh, that's kind of the same, yeah, it's the same person too. Like I said, I think off in the future, there's some potential there. We would have to adjust our schema a fair amount in order to accommodate all states and their systems. But it would be really, really cool to maybe just be really humble and target maybe the 75% or 50 or 60% of what all of the states are doing the same. Like, are they all doing water supply estimates, and are they all doing water use? Well, we know that at least with water use, they are doing all of that because they're working with USGS on water use estimates for their 5-year reports. So that's an interesting question. We'll have to see. I would imagine that would be would come up in the next 5 to 10 years. All right. The next question is, what security issues are there with making this public? Why are state agencies historically currently holding information tight to chest? Well, this is a little bit more of a sensitive, Jen. Security-wise, all of the information that we're asking the states to share is generally already made public. A lot of the states have water rights information online already that lists and things like that. The only thing where it's a little bit fuzzy are where you have water rights for community water suppliers, and the states can decide whether or not they want to share that kind of public water supply information. For your second question, why are the state agencies historically or currently holding information tight to chest? Well, if you know water, and you know water in the West, you'll know that, my goodness, it's not an easy issue to try and resolve. And the states have long histories of litigation surrounding water. And I think that was their main concern, was that data can be a wonderful thing, but it can also be a sword. It can be used against you. So, you know, in a scenario where one state reviews your methodology and says, we don't have enough water here, perhaps this state has some water, and this is the method that they're using to evaluate it, but we don't like that. So let's bring that to the court. That's a scenario that could very feasibly happen. So I think the states have to have some confidence in the numbers that they're putting out there. And that's one of the really awesome byproducts of open data policies, is that, one, it makes the data providers stop and take stock and decide whether or not their data are good enough to share. And that has an impact on their quality control and on their programs in general. If they're not good enough to share, you shouldn't be using them. One of the nice things about the WaDE schema is that it requires methodology information for almost any kind of estimate or calculation or reported use, that kind of thing. So you can see why the states would have some issues, at least initially, with sharing data, but I think they're coming around to the idea that this is a really good idea and would help them in the long run as opposed to the short term. Okay, thanks for sharing the different phases, but what are the top 3 items for WaDE's wish list? Ooh, oh, that's really good. Like we said, when we first started, we had a survey of all the state capabilities, and the only thing that the states were doing was capturing water rights information in a database format. And then some of them were working on water uses, and then a lot of them have at least some kind of summary level data, either for water use or for water supply. If I could ask the states to go back and do anything, it would be, let's find one geospatial unit that you could include, like a HUC-8 or HUC, let's not get greedy with a HUC-12, but we'll stick with a HUC-8 and say, in addition to whatever it is that you're doing right now that you need to do, can you also estimate water use at a HUC-8 scale for a water year, say? And just start with that as one of the things that we could work on that would make WaDE data more comparable through the whole West instead of just state by state. So, a geospatial scale that we can agree on, a couple of methods that we could agree on, having everybody take their state water plans. They're published online and they're in PDF, but they're not digital. Transfer that information into a database, whether it's the WaDE database or something else, and then share that. That would be fantastic, huge step forward. All right, similar to Mark, perhaps a wish list. What are the major roadblocks to success with speed, as this looks to be a long-term project given the fragmentation in data sources? The major roadblocks are the fact that a lot of the states have a lot of money put into their legacy programs, and the council, even though we work on a more regional level, and I think this is the only group that really could do this. You couldn't have a federal agency come in and say, hey, share your data. And you couldn't have one state come in and say, hey, let's all share our data. The other states would probably not go for that. So the council coming in and saying, let's all share our information. Let's agree to a couple of different terms and have a community vocabulary. That in itself is a pretty big step forward. The major roadblock to success with speed is really making this a higher priority to the states. Right now this is a kind of a back burner project that they're all working on, and unless they actually dedicate the IT resources to getting it done in a short period of time, what I've seen in the past is that it kind of languishes. It stays on somebody's desk for several months, and then I contact them and say, hey, where are you in the deployment? And they're like, oh yeah, I got to work on that. So that's a major roadblock, is just having it be a back burner project. Overcoming the differences in methodologies between the states is a big roadblock. I'm trying to think of the other major challenges. Just the thing I mentioned before, like differences in spatial scale, temporal scale, and methodologies. It's going to make this a really more fragmented at first, and then as the states have that discussion, hopefully get more streamlined in the future. Okay, you've mentioned federal support often. What more can be done from the federal level? Well, I think that most of the folks that we've talked to within federal agencies are very, very supportive of this WaDE project. They're used to trying to do the same thing that Sandia does, where their water science centers go to the state agencies and try and get information. That is cumbersome, and so this really excites a lot of people to be able to get this kind of information from the states in a more streamlined fashion is very cool. USGS has offered a lot of support from their IT group and that has been really beneficial too. I think in terms of federal data sharing, just having an open water data initiative discussion is really valuable. I don't know that they'll be, being able to share federal data sets for all federal agencies anytime soon, but just the fact that they're having that conversation is really valuable. So we're participating in those as much as we can. All right, I think I've gone over time pretty significantly.
Well, Sarah, thank you. You did a wonderful job. Thank you very much. I actually have one quick question. It's actually a two-part question for you. When do you think those first states are going to come online or be publicly available? Right. And how far back does the historical record go or tend to go for these states?
At least the first 3 states, and hopefully a couple more in about 2 months. That's my projected release time. And then this December, we're going to have a big release party with Western Governors Association at their winter meetings. I'm not exactly sure where those are yet, but that's when I hope to be able to unveil this and have at least 5 or 6 states who are flowing data. But keep in mind, this is the kind of long-term project for the states that they have to get more comfortable with. So what they do is they look at the schema and they say, okay, I want to share just water use and basin budgets. And they'll start out with that and then add more in as they get more comfortable with this project. Your second question was, can you repeat the second question for me?
Sure. The information that you have, the data that you're working with, how far back historically will it go?
I think most of the states are interested in going back maybe 3 or 4 or 5 years because the methods that they've used to generate this kind of information has changed recently. And in fact, a lot of the states are undergoing revisions to their methodologies right now that make it hard for them to share different parts of their programs. But generally, 3 to 5 years. And the WaDE schema allows them to share projections too, but nobody wanted to do that just yet. Thank you. I really appreciate it. Thank you so much for having me, and I apologize for going over time.
Well, thank you very much. This was incredibly useful. We really appreciate your time and a great presentation.
Okay, thank you. Have a good day, everybody. Bye.
Nope, terrific. And I'm sure we'll be following up soon. Thanks again. Bye.